complained of has waived confidentiality. And so we are going to address it in public today. We also, that's going to be followed by another complaint, 2023-6. And the person complained of in that complaint has also waived confidentiality. There was responses to both those complaints filed by an attorney for both of the persons complained against, Attorney Fitzgerald, and indicated that the complaints be joined, that they be heard together. I think that probably that would be it, that the person who's made the complaints would have something to say about that as well. So, Mr. Murphy, and I don't know who, yes, do you have any objection that those two complaints were heard together?
I do not, sir, because they both, actually all three, the one that still remains confidential, all pertain to the same laws being violated.
So then if you have no objection to that, then what we'll do is we could hear, I think, unless the parties have, any other parties have any objections, so we could hear them together. Does the committee feel that that would be appropriate? Or would you like to keep them separate?
I guess when we take action on them, we'll take action on them individually, but we'll hear evidence at the same time.
Right.
I have no objection to that.
Okay. You have no objection? I think what we're doing today is what's called an initial review. If you look at the rules for our committee meetings, the very first thing that the committee does is conduct an initial review. Typically, we do that facially. We just do that on the face of the complaint and make a determination as to whether or not we think the complaint should go forward. So, but because confidentiality was waived in this case, I suggested that it might be a good idea to have both the person making the complaint and the people who complained against on those two complaints come in and basically flesh out the complaints for us. And so what we did was invite people to come in and for 10 minutes and to speak to us, give them each 10 minutes to explain their side of the story, what they felt was important. So that would help us in making a decision as to whether or not we should go forward with the complaints after our initial review. So what I would plan to, and that's 10 minutes for them to speak. The committee obviously may have questions as well after that, but you have up until 10 minutes to do that. We're going to make it a flat 10 minutes so we don't go on all afternoon today, okay? And so what we'll do is we will call upon Mr. Murphy, who's made the complaints first, and he can explain why he's brought the complaints, why he feels that there's an ethical violation that should be addressed, and perhaps what he thinks the remedy for that violation should be, if in fact we did find that there was a violation. So if you want to step up.
And do I need to turn this off?
No. I don't believe we're broadcasting. So.
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the New Hampshire Legislative Ethics Committee. You've all received my complaint in great detail. So I want to take this in a somewhat different direction. And I have given a copy of this to Mr. Lambert for passage later on. I also handed him a packet of information. Let me start with this abstracted quote from Commander Salamander, who is a retired Navy officer, lamenting about the sad state of affairs in this country, which I lightly edited. I found it apt as it summarizes much about what this hearing is about: abandonment. If there is a characteristic of the last few years, it is abandonment. Abandonment either of duties, friends, families, or of principles. once seen as a disgrace and a blight upon one's honor. Now, I don't think so. We abandoned thousands, really tens of thousands, of American citizens, family members, and allies in Afghanistan. Recently, we abandoned almost as many in Sudan. After a news cycle or two, the press loses interest. Our politicians, or at least most of them, move on. The fault is not so much our government or our civil society, but really it is all of our fault. We allow this abandonment, this disregard for ethics, the amoral failure of the responsibility to protect and honor our word, to stand up for unwritten agreements. Abandonment breaks the bonds of stewardship that binds a society together. We fail the fundamentals. And then we wonder why we cannot execute anything effectively anymore. We shrug at dishonor and then wonder where the quality of civil society went. No one in power is challenged. No one is held accountable unless it fits a certain agenda. End quote. Let me add to that. I would add to the abandonment of honor, of courage, of loyalty, of honesty, of duty, of promises, and of oaths that are the embodiment of all of those attributes and more. Oaths seemingly seem nothing nowadays, merely a string of words that are mandatory to say to assume the seat that we, the people, have put our elected representatives into. A mere formality, never to be referenced again by those saying it. I have watched many of those ignore those words already. I'm betting that many who say the words could now be easily convinced that they could be abandoned, cast aside, just as easily as they say the Constitution is ancient and meant for a time that no longer exists. By the way, I happen to heartily disagree with that notion. It does seem that many certainly forget their oaths as soon as they are said. Why? It would remove what an oath by elected representatives is supposed to culminate in: accountability. The promise and plea to constituents: hold me responsible to my promise, my oath to you, at all times. That is the summary of why I brought these complaints. This old-fashioned belief that such things should matter, not just to some, but to all. But a quaint notion as a stroll in the park in Victorian Dimer. In all three complaints, who is willing to hold them accountable to their promises, to faithfully adhere to the black and white text of a written law, and to demonstrate a fealty to the law, not just in action, but as a matter of the heart. Sadly, there has been no mass uprising. Apathy, a lack of knowledge and awareness reigns. Hopefully, I hope, once again here in New Hampshire, one person can make that difference. Sadly, all three abandoned the oaths and the promises to strictly follow the law. They willingly broke their oaths to us all. Worse, they broke the trust that we expected. We should not, cannot, adopt a lesser standard of measure for them simply because, well, it's politics. The bigotry of low expectations from those that are supposed to be servant leaders. Yet, that is what they have done. In each complaint, I have provided both several violations and multiple examples thereof. While they are summary in form, I can tell you that far more supporting detail is available on graniterock.com, of which I am the founder. And I go to a lot of events, and then I report on them in detail. Videos were often embedded in those posts showing their actions and words as acts of accountability. You can hear their own words and watch their own actions without me being the filter. There are additional videos backing up these assertions on my YouTube channel. Full recordings, however, is on the delegation meetings. Full recordings of the delegation meetings, with one notable budget subcommittee exception, are also on the Belknap County's Video on Demand found on the Lakes Region Public Access. So you don't have to even read Granite Rock. Good government is one that is open and transparent, and whose procedures can be known and followed by the public. We in New Hampshire deserve nothing less, but that is what occurred. In New Hampshire, the latter is prescribed in statute. That process is lost when the law is ignored. All three representatives were warned by more experienced ones and others, like me, that they were in the wrong. They willfully disregarded the laws that prescribe the mandatory actions expected of them. They should not, cannot be tolerated. In reviewing each complaint, I ask that the committee either remove them from office for such blatant disregard for their oaths, as in faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all duties incumbent upon me as a state representative according to the best of my ability, agreeably to the rules and regulations of this Constitution and the laws of this state of New Hampshire. They decided to fail. Failing to come to such a conclusion of removal, I ask that you advance a censorship finding. In the positions of leadership that they sought comes the responsibility to study, learn, and inculcate such laws that govern them. They ignored that. I know that as an SB2 Budget Committee member, once elected, I made sure to study all the laws governing the Budget Committee's processes, as well as municipal level budgets, school districts, and water district budget processes. I held myself to such a high standard to show good faith to those who voted for me. Shouldn't I then be able to hold my elected representatives to the same standard with respect to the delegation laws, RSA 91A and RSA 249C and D? To summarize, simply to follow the law. Thank you for your service and time in protecting the reputation and dignity of the New Hampshire legislature. And if there are any questions at this time, I will be happy to answer. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, procedural question. I understand that we are combining complaints number 5 and 6,
Yep.
2023. Are we also combining 2020, number 7, or is that separate?
Separate.
Okay, perhaps the witnesses should be reminded that only the 2 complaints are in public session and not the 3rd.
Understood. And I would like to be able to say I'm saving the committee time because I would be saying the same thing for all 3. I have not identified who the 3rd complainant is.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Other questions? Yes.
So we're the Legislative Ethics Committee, and we are charged with applying the provisions of the ethics guidelines. Can you tell us specifically what ethics guideline you think was violated?
I think that in violating New Hampshire law is certainly part of that ethics process. That when there was as I've said, a willful disregard and trying to mash up 2 different laws, in the case of one, failure to officially send out notices in the second opinion, that shows a disregard for what they have given in their oaths. That in itself should be an ethics violation, correct?
We are charged with violations of what's written in this book, and I'm asking which specific guideline was violated. It seems like you're alleging violations of the right to know law, 91A.
That is correct.
And so you're aware that the process for complaints about 91A goes to an ombudsman?
It can, as well as to Superior Court.
So have you pursued those?
I have not yet.
Okay,
This is a first step.
okay, thank you.
Yes.
So just to follow up on former Speaker Seitek's question, so is it your view that any violation of the law is a basis to take some ethics committee action against a legislator?
In the general, I would say yes, but in these first 2 cases, and I will speak only to those 2, there were multiple instances of disregard for that law. Once can be viewed as a mistake. And if, after apologizing, make sure that that mistake doesn't happen again, then I would say a little a little harm, but no foul. However, both of them were counseled by others, other representatives more experienced in this, as well as others. I tend to use RSA 91A a lot. that they were in the wrong, and that they weren't publicly noticing the meetings, which meant that the public could not attend unless they were intimately involved with the representatives who happened to casually say, oh, we have a meeting. I was locked out of 2 of them because I did not know of those meetings. I put in a right to know, as my complaint said, to prove that the nuance in one of the meetings that can be viewed in the video, that the noticing did not take place. I did it at the general ledger account level of the county's budget to prove that the 3 budget subcommittee meetings were never addressed by invoice or remittance to the Daily Sun, to which RSA 91A says that the paper of record needs to have an ad by the delegation to promote the public meeting. That was wrong. They ended up having to say, oops, we have to have a make-up meeting because those meetings were illegal, because they weren't properly noticed. We happened, while I was on the budget committee, improperly noticed a couple of our subcommittee meetings. We realized that we were off by just a few hours. Afterwards, we said, all that work before that subcommittee meeting must be scrubbed clean. We have to call the meeting again and start from scratch. That's how seriously I take this. So for me, this is not rocket science. You read the law, you learn the law, because your responsibility as an elected representative depends on it. Willful denial that you have to follow it, simply by dint of not doing it, should be an ethics complaint, should be an ethics violation.
No further questions.
I have a couple quick questions.
Absolutely.
So, having read your complaint, there are basically 2 sort of events or series of events. One is an initial meeting that was called on a Friday and then happened on a Monday. No adequate notice for that meeting. And then subsequent budget meetings.
That is correct. And I think that the first is more egregious than the second.
Okay, so that's so a question about, and I wasn't clear from your complaint, and I wasn't clear from the response either as to the status of Representative Bean or the clerk at the time as to whether they were holding those positions at that time. Was Representative Bean the chair at the time, or was he just a delegation member?
Let me go back to
And
the
the
first one.
same with Mr. O'Hara. Representative O'Hara, was he officially the clerk at that time, or not?
At the time of the first incident that you brought up, both were just members of the delegation. And the reason why it is rather egregious is that Representative Bean tried to do a mashup of both RSA 91A and 24(9)D, trying to use the best of both for his political advantage, in my humble opinion. RSA 91A does have the parachute clause, whereby the chair of a political body, in this case the delegation, if so warranted for an emergency meeting, can call that meeting, and using RSA 91A can have that within 2 business days. The problem is that Representative Bean tried to call that, and he was not the chair. That was the Honorable Mike Sylvia, who was at the time, decided that it was not an emergency and therefore did not have to call the meeting. Now, the fallback for that is under 24(9)D. 24, as you all know, governs the actions of a delegation, has the ability that if the chair of the delegation, again, Mike Sylvia, decides not to call a meeting, if there is a majority of the quorum, as outlined in 9D, agree to have a meeting, they can have that meeting, and I have no problem with that. The problem was in trying to do a mashup of the 2-day notice for 91A and trying to substitute that in for the 7-day required notice of 9D. That's why, and I told him personally, he could not do that. I made it clear to other people, you cannot do that. I have a handout that I gave to Mr. Lambert, and the last part of that is an email thread I have with the county attorney. Because I started asking questions, why are you letting this go? He sent me the memorandum that he sent out. And while I am just a retired software engineer, words matter, especially when you're writing code. A single punctuation mark out of order can cause what we call an avid, an external error. But it's the same here in the law. You cannot quote the law to say something can happen, but by leaving out the relevant part of the law in your memorandum, you give the wrong impression. And that last part of that packet that I gave to Mr. Lambert goes through that entire discourse that I had with County Attorney Lavernos. And at one point when I tried to insist, you have to also use these pieces. You never mentioned the chair of the delegation had to be the one triggering that you cannot do 2 days versus 7 days. He stopped answering. And I thought that was egregious. I opined upon that on multiple occasions. And I told other delegation members, you can't do this. This constitutes an illegal meeting. And later on, you know what happened.
If I can just follow up on that.
Sure.
Because I think that's the question I had. So this meeting was called on a Friday, happened on a Monday.
Correct.
As I read it. When was Representative Bean, using Representative, when did you give him notice, or when was he given notice that that was a problem?
It was discussed beforehand and discussed afterwards. I discussed it a couple of times with other members as well, that you cannot do a mashup of 2 laws and make it stick.
Okay, but, so.
As far as the exact timing,
I'm just trying to get a sense of whether somebody said to Representative Bean before he called the meeting on Friday, you can't do that.
the problem was that he had no authority to call the meeting in the first place. And Representative Bean was also a member of the Guilford Budget Committee. And I knew him for a couple of years before he became a representative. He knew how RSA 91A worked because we, I would say, not just faithfully, but made it an imperative that that's how we followed it in doing our business, to make sure that the public knew when we were going to have a meeting, to make sure that they could attend and see how their elected representatives were acting towards the budget. So I was very surprised when he tried to not follow the law. And that's why, and I've written about it a number of times. I could probably go back in my writings and find out the time and date. I apologize, I don't have it on the top of my head. The calling of the other meetings, that's I'm not even sure how to describe how I felt once I found out later. But again, that is the clerk's responsibility to place the public notices that worked. And again, I did the right to know against the county. No invoices were ever received, no remittances were ever paid. I did get from the county attorney the 2 ads that were placed, but they were for the full delegation meetings and not the subcommittee. I also talked to the publisher, Adam Hershey, of the Daily Sun, and he sent me the 2 ads that I received from the county. I received the invoices he sent, and he said there are no ads for those 3 subcommittee meetings. And it wasn't on the website.
And I guess if I could just follow up on the same
Sure.
line, and that is, and I think there was as I read the response, there was an acknowledgement that they were not properly noticed, and allegedly corrective action taken after the fact, but they weren't, Representative O'Hara was a participant or involved in those budget meetings?
Yes, and so
And
was Representative.
was Representative Bean involved with those meetings?
Yes, because they drew payments for those meetings.
Well, in terms of involvement, drawing payments is one thing, but by drawing payments, are you saying they attended?
They attended and the video confirms it. But the own delegation's videos up on LRPA shows that they were there, except for the first subcommittee meeting because that recording was canceled. And I note that, in my testimony that you will receive a copy of it.
And if I could, one more question, who chaired those meetings?
I'm afraid I might get myself in trouble if I mention the name right now because of confidentiality.
Okay, thank you. Since I asked a ton of questions, anything else haven't?
And I am happy to answer it, as you can tell.
Thank you for coming. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I have one question. With respect to the complaint number 5, you mentioned that the subcommittee meetings, there were requirements of minutes and motions for the subcommittee meetings, and they weren't met. I was just wondering, where are the requirements for the motions and meetings minutes that you referred to there?
In RSA 91A, that on each action, a motion has to be made, seconded, and it has to be noted in the minutes, and that was not done at the correct times. And again, that is the fault, in my opinion, of the clerk. And he was told this was a problem.
Told
By another representative
at what point?
several times during the span of those 3 the budget subcommittees. It was great consternation that most of it was not well done.
Any questions?
You've exceeded your 10 minutes,
Yeah, well, those are the questions, yes.
prerogative of the chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Dean?
Well, I guess I did that. I'm gonna start out with the gun stock issue, seeing that's where all of this stems from. And the majority of the people that are on board with that were on the other side of the gun stock issue. Contrary to what he just said, I take my oath very seriously. My oath was to represent the people. On that gun stock issue, I had, I don't know, half a dozen people that called and tried to intimidate me to not do this after I had already gotten, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a high school dropout, for the record. So knowing that I'm not a lawyer, I went to the county attorney Andrew Livernois, and I said, you know, I got all these people that want gun stock opened. And he said, well, you know, this law here says that you're good, and this law here, he says it's slightly gray, where, you know, somebody that wanted to create problems could go to court and try to raise Cain with me. But he said that he was fairly confident that they would fail. And all I wanted to do was open gun stock because I must have had 100 people contact me, people I went to school with. I actually had one guy that's a reporter come to me and he said, you know, you're not doing anything to fix this problem. I can't wait till the next election so I can vote against you. You've been my friend for 60 years. Well, maybe not quite 60, I was maybe 55, just to be safe. You know, I don't know what this new evidence was that was passed out here. Obviously, I didn't get it. It sounded more like Mr. Murphy was giving a lecture as opposed to telling me what I did wrong. You know, when I get legal advice from the county attorney, and then I went to my attorney, that I have a business and I have him as an attorney. I went to him on my own dime, because if I screwed up, I didn't want the county paying for my screw up. So I went to my attorney, and it turned out that he was also the attorney for the county. I guess I kind of knew that before. There's a difference between the county attorney and the attorney for the county. Go figure. So I got a second opinion from him, and he told me that on the gun stock issue, you see the gun stock issue, they say that these dozen or so, maybe 2 dozen people say that there was no emergency. Well, the Monday that we had this, I might be rambling a bit here because I don't have mine written down. The Monday that we had this was like 3 days before Soul Fest was supposed to have their big event at Gunstock. We had no senior staff because they had all walked out because of problems that they had had with one of the commissioners. And it kind of had us hostage, but I really wasn't too fond of that. But at any rate, whether they had us hostage or not, I felt that I had to open Gunstock because the word on the street is that Soulfest was going to sue us for $600,000. And I know that in a contract situation, if one side breaches the contract, there can be legal problems. That was one issue. Another issue that was on the street was that our insurance, the insurance, so if somebody gets hurt, they pay your, I can't think of the right word, they pay the suit. Liability, that's the word I was looking for, believe it or not. So they were going to cancel our liability insurance because all of our senior people were gone, and there was nobody there that was qualified, quote unquote, to run the show. So they were going to cancel our insurance, which would also have been an emergency in my opinion. They had like several weeks before they had to start preparing for the ski season. That wasn't quite as much of an emergency because there was enough time to properly, quote unquote, notice the meeting. There was a lot of this intimidation going on via phone calls. And I didn't get together a bunch of people on one place at one time because I didn't want to break any laws or rules and have a quorum. So I talked to people individually, and some of them said that, yeah, they really thought that it ought to happen, but they were getting phone calls. And they were going to get primaried, and they were going to get this, and they were, just different baloney, in my opinion. And I said, well, I don't care what they do to me. They can primary me. I'm going to do what the people want, as opposed to some other people that say, no, I don't care what they want. I know what's right for them. There are people like that, believe it or not. So that was the emergency of that. The reason that it got to that point where, you might think, well, why didn't you do this 2 weeks earlier? Well, the fact of the matter is that sometime in July, I found out I have stage 3 colon cancer. And I had surgery. I was in the hospital, that's why I didn't do it. I don't know if that's an emergency or not, but it was pretty hard for me to talk to these people and see what, I wanted to see what the rest of the delegation felt, one by one. I wanted to see what their feelings were. And when I found out what all the feelings were, more of them felt the way that I did than felt the way that they did. So, that's why the emergency. Being in the hospital, and I had a third of my large intestines removed. And 2 days after I got out of the hospital is when I started working on this. So I hope that that answers any questions of me on the gun stock issue. I don't know how that could be spun any different than what actually happened, but whatever. Does anybody have any questions on the gun stock issue?
Yes.
So am I understanding correctly that what you're telling us is that you got an opinion you got two opinions that said, while this might not be crystal clear, the attorneys recommended that you should proceed, you proceeded, and as I understand it from reading the materials that were provided, the courts apparently agreed with you.
Yes, they did. There was 2 different lawsuits brought by 2 different people for the same reason as far as I'm concerned. It may not be exactly word for word.
So we have a situation where you got legal advice from 2 attorneys. You proceeded in accordance with that advice. The people who disagreed went to court and they lost, and now they are asking this committee to take some personal action against you. I have to say that strikes me as outrageous.
I agree. Whatever that may be. I brought some documents that I'm sure that Mr. Murphy and his friends all have copies of that I will pass out. Some of them are the, you just want me to pass it to one
Just
side?
give them to the clerk, or our attorney, excuse me.
The reason that I had attorney, my attorney, Fitzgerald, thank you. I don't know if it's the age or the intenseness of this. But I had him write the letter to you because he's far more articulate than I am. And not only that, he knew exactly what happened and when it happened because it was him that I was talking to. I did get advice from others like Mr. Murphy. This is wrong, this is bad, don't do it, and on and on and on and on. But I also know that he is not an attorney either. So that's why I went to 2 attorneys, the county attorney and the attorney for the county. And they both agreed that Mr. Murphy was wrong, and obviously the judge thought that these guys were wrong too. Twice.
And I think that gets to my question, because in a similar line, looking at it and saying, well, you got opinions from attorneys, your own attorney, but from the county attorney in particular, who, as I read what he had to say, but basically he says, you know, it appears to be ambiguous, but it appears that you could rationally do what you were doing. The question is, had you already had somebody come to you and say, you can't do that because you're not following 91A?
Yes, sir. Mr. Murphy was one of them. There were several others that also aren't attorneys, but are, I don't know how to say it, I'm not gonna be polite, but they're of the same group.
And I guess what I'd like to have you do is just finish up with regard to the second part of that, and that is the allegations with regard to the subcommittee meetings and your participation.
Okay, so, when we were getting ready for the subcommittee budget committee, not realizing that it wasn't my duty, because I'm not as up to snuff on this as he seems to think I ought to be, I went to the county administrator, Deb Shackett, who is right here, by the way, that would like to also say some things. I don't know if I should ask her, or if you're gonna ask her.
We're not gonna ask her.
Well, at any rate, so you're not gonna hear from her at all?
No.
Okay, so maybe I can reiterate what happened. Okay, so I went to her, and I said, I wanna make sure that these things happen, that they're, because I've been, brought over the coals over the no proper notifications on the gun stock thing. I knew that that's pretty serious stuff. So I went to her and I said, you're gonna make sure that happens. She said that she would definitely do that. She's been doing that for 15 years, or thereabouts. But unbeknownst to me, it wasn't even my job to contact her, it was my clerk's job to contact her. And since all of this started, my clerk informed me that he also made sure that the county administrator was aware that she was supposed to notice these. So, and she's been doing it for a long time. So we get to the meeting, and there starts to be some grumbling about it wasn't properly noticed and this and that. And I probably looked like a deer in the headlights because I had no idea that it wasn't properly noticed, because I had told her that it had to be properly noticed, and he was looking at me and was looking at each other. We didn't know exactly what went on, but something obviously is a problem here. So after digging into it further, county administrator said that she did in fact drop the ball on this. Whether that's proper lingo or not, I don't know, but she was supposed to do this on like a Friday afternoon. She was supposed to put the notifications out to some of her underlings, were supposed to be doing it, and she was gonna check on them. But she got phone calls from other delegate members and threw her off track, and then there was an emergency, and then it was the end of the day, and then it was the weekend, and by Monday, it had completely slipped her mind that she hadn't done it. She said she made a mistake. She apologized to me. I think she apologized to Mr. O'Hara. I know that she made a public apology in the paper that she had made a mistake. But there was at least one person, without any doubt whatsoever, that knew that these were not properly noticed within seconds. Probably not seconds, maybe just minutes, of when it didn't happen, knew about it, but rather than come to the chair, the vice chair, or the clerk, or even to Ms. Shackett, they chose to keep this a big secret so that they could have a big unveiling of the fact that we screwed up at the meeting, which they did. And so when we found out that had happened, I said to myself, wow, this got screwed up. How do we fix it? So what did I do? I'm not a lawyer. So I went back to Paul Fitzgerald and I said, she didn't do what she was supposed to do. It sounds like a simple mistake to me. And what I'd like to do is, if there's anybody in this room that has never ever made a mistake, please raise your hand, because I would like to talk to you so that I don't ever make another one myself. Just to show you how foolish that is.
So, and that just got to my question, and that was because there were, as I read it, there were 3 meetings. It was a series of meetings. So at some point in time, after the first meeting, did somebody say to you, hey, this meeting isn't properly noticed? And you said, well, so what, we're gonna have another meeting?
No. To what end, sir? What would I stand to gain by trying to do that? There's no way that happened. When we found out that they had not been properly noticed, which was kind of at the end, like the gun stock thing, just for a second, that was not properly noticed. It was only 2 days. I want you to know that there were approximately 300 people at that meeting, approximately. I didn't count them, but it was approximately 300. For a meeting that was only noticed for 2 days, I don't think that was a bad turnout. The the other meetings, when we found out that the 5 of those meetings were not properly noticed, I was not notified in between then, no. I wasn't notified until it was over, I think. And then, I went to Fitzgerald and he said, well, you gotta do this and you gotta ratify that and do this and that. And so I did everything that he told me that I should do to fix the mistake that I didn't make. I did the best I could do with legal advice that I got on my own dime, not the county's dime. Because maybe I'm supposed to know that stuff, but I didn't. So I got his advice and we did that. So what happens then? We go to have this special meeting to ratify everything that happened on the other meetings. And my friends behind me got together, several of them, including the one that knew within minutes of not proper notifications, and others were there, and they had this 91A paper, one of them, it had the 91A information on it, and he disrupted the meeting, or tried to. It's right there, he kept hollering and screaming and he wouldn't stop. And finally, I had to call the sheriff, who was at home and out of uniform, to come in and stop the disruption of the meeting. The sheriff came in, he got dressed again, came in from Belmont, he got there, and it's right there. The guy was pointing, it's right there. The sheriff says, yeah, it's right there, that's what it says. You cannot do what you're doing. And he left.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I don't know, I'm sorry that I was rambling. But this is what happened. I didn't have to write this down, this is what happened.
Any other questions?
So when did you become chair of the delegation?
Well, I never wanted to be the chair of the delegation. If you'd asked me a year ago, I'd said this never happened. When I called that special meeting for Gunstock,
So you called the special meeting because it was an emergency, and you could do that with the consent of a majority of the delegation?
that's right, ma'am.
And you secured the majority of the delegation?
Yes, ma'am. And when I got to the meeting, the special meeting, I thought that the chair was gonna run the meeting. He's the chairman. I called the special meeting. I assumed the chair was gonna run the meeting. They said, well, he's not here. He's not running the meeting. So I said, well, the vice chair's gonna be around here somewhere. And they said, no, the vice chair isn't either. I said, well, who runs the meeting then? They said, who called the special meeting? I said, well, I did. They said, well, you're running the meeting. I said, oh my God. I was terrified. I'm not a public speaker. I'm starting to get used to it a little bit, but I had to run the meeting at that point. And shortly after that, they elected the other chair, who was, in my opinion, a good chair. Resigned unexpectedly, and I wound up again being put in the chair's position, and I wasn't quite prepared for it again.
So
Because I thought
you were acting chair? Or?
I was I wound up being acting chair until I was elected, and then I was,
Oh, so you were elected eventually?
and then this term I was re-elected as chair.
Thank you.
Questions? Thank you, Representative. Senator O'Hare.
Mr. Bean covered a lot of the issue when it came to the not noting the budget committee meeting. But a couple things that I would like to say that were, I don't know if they're intentionally misinformed or just misinformed accidentally, but I am the clerk of the delegation, but I was not the clerk of the budget committee. So yes, I was supposed to notice the very first one, which if you do go back to RSA 24.9, after the clerk of the convention, it says, or his or her designee shall mail the notices out. I do have a designee, which is Deborah Shack, our county administrator, who has openly apologized for the mistake of not noticing the first meeting. After the first meeting, during the first meeting, we elected a clerk of the budget committee, which was not myself. So from there, I did not know I had the responsibility to note the second or third meeting that was supposedly not noted correctly for the subcommittee. not know any of these meetings were improperly noticed until we were going to vote on the budget as a delegation as a whole, and then a theatrical show was made out of the issue from the former clerk, who could have came to us and let us do this well in advance. And he was right, there was no motions noted in the minutes during the meetings, because there was no motion made till the end of the budget committee to accept what we accumulated on the budget as a whole. So that was, the first votes that we took was for the leadership, which was missed and then duly put back in when we made the ratification votes. And then the only other motion we made was to accept the budget that we put together as a whole. And other than that, I don't have much to say, I don't have any quotes to give you, but I can take any questions from anyone.
Questions? The only question I have is, with regard to the meeting, you did talk with Deb Shackett about noticing the meeting?
Yes, I spoke with her in her office and at the meetings, and then I did not know about the second or third meeting, because we had a clerk at that time.
And thanks.
Well, I just ask one. I'm sorry, I'm not sure that Mr. Bean covered this. Can you just tell us, what was the time between as I understand, there were 3 of the budget subcommittee. What was the time what was the time interval between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3?
I cannot say off the top of my head. If I could turn around and ask Ms. Shackett, she would know off the top of her head, probably.
About 2 weeks.
2 weeks. A week apart.
And I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but would they all had to be separately noticed, and was there a mistake with regard to noticing all 3?
I think they were supposed to be separately noticed. I don't know. Again, I'm responsible for the first one, so that's the one I was really paying attention to, trying to.
One notice for all.
One notice for all of them was supposed to be.
One notice for all of them?
Mhm.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was helpful. So, we're basically doing an initial review of the complaints. So at this point in time, what the committee will do is consider how to proceed on the complaints and whether they should be proceeded upon. If we did decide to proceed on the complaints, we would then go into a preliminary investigation phase, and then everybody would get to testify if they wanted to, and we would be looking for more input at the time. And I guess I'm looking for what the committee would like to do right now, whether, particularly with the agenda we have today, whether you want to, at this point in time, take it under advisement and deliberate set another meeting to deliberate, or do you want to deliberate at this point in time? One suggestion, and that is, we probably ought to take a look at the 3rd complaint before we
Yes.
do that. So, what I'm gonna do is, I'm going to close the hearing that we're having on 2023-5 and 6 at this point in time, our consideration. And then what we're gonna go is, we're gonna go into a non-public session and look at the 3rd complaint. And then, I guess we'll come back and decide what we wanna do with the complaints. Yes?
Is that gonna be today, sir?
To decide what we're gonna do with the complaints, is that what you're asking?
Yes, sir. The other complaint, the 3rd one, that I have no idea who it's against or whatever.
Well, with the 3rd one, what we're
Is
gonna
that
do is,
today?
we're gonna go into non-public session right now, and we're gonna look
After
at that.
that, you might.
And then we're gonna come back to, then after that, we'll go back into, a public session to deliberate, I guess, or if.
Deliberate non-public.
Huh?
I believe we deliberate non-public session.
We deliberate non-public. So So we would,
Okay, so can I expect some kind of determination later on today? If I hang out there and I don't come to the deliberation?
I'm not sure you'll get something today.
Or maybe.
You may, but I'm not,
I'm hanging out waiting.
I can't guarantee you, Representative, that you would get a decision today.
I'm not trying to pressure you. If you need more time, you need more time. I just want, I want this all behind me as soon as possible. I'm
Yeah.
sick of dealing with it.
All what I wanna do is do it right. And
Absolutely,
I
that's
wanna-
first.
I wanna do it right and I wanna be fair, so that's what I want. Okay?
I move we go into non-public session pursuant to RSA 14B3, Roman numeral, I, small d, to conduct an initial review of complaint number 20237.
Second.
Motion